Our sermon tonight is everyone wants to be told what to do. I could make it specifically referring to religions. I could make it specifically referring to this. Although some of you, between you and your partner, would say that initially that was not true, that you were attempting to find a guru or a spiritual teacher, and if I insisted, or if I'd caught you then and said, what you want is someone to tell you what to do, it's very likely that many of you hearing this would have denied it and said, no, I do not want somebody to tell me what to do. I want someone to tell me the secret. I want somebody to give me the information I need. I don't want somebody to tell me what to do. But if you had done that, or if right now you think that you would have done that and there would have been a modicum of truth in it, you're deluding yourself again. Let's don't play with words. You wanted someone to tell you what to do. Now, out of all the kinds of questions that I get from you people, that I get from people who write me that read something or saw me in one of those little appearances in some city, I guess I will say the second most asked question is on the basis of how should I treat other people. Now, oftentimes the question appears to be much more specific, such as how should I treat a member of the opposite sex so that I can keep a relationship going? Or how should I treat the person with whom I am now involved? They seem to have a continuing string of problems with me. How should I treat my parents? How should I treat acquaintances I have that are getting very nosy as to what I'm up to? How should I treat my employer, who has the apparent innate ability to rub me like a cheap comb? Some of you might want to go ahead and guess, since you asked questions yourself, what the first most asked question is, if that's the second. But on the basis of how should I treat people, you should be able to see quite easily that ordinary people, as you might expect by now, have how many possibilities? As always, you should have known it, is a dose. That is, you treat people the way in which you have to treat people once you begin to see it at all. That is, the way in which you seem to be wired up, and whoever it is in question, you treat them as you must, even though you or your partner may later regret it in words. That your mother says something to you several times you see her a year, and you just suddenly say the same thing back. Or your sexual partner says something to you that's said 2 or 3 times a week, and no matter what plans you have made, you respond in the same old way of, why don't you lay off of me? Or it's none of your business, or shut up. That's one way. The second way is to treat people on the basis of some external standard. I might refer some of you with a good memory back to the one that I know many of you always come up with looks of perplexion. It's those examples I have made, and then the rhetorical question as to why aphorisms, truisms, proverbs seem to have such an effect. To read something that is, remember my old example, it is better to die like a man than to live like a dog. And a prisoner of war says, that carried me for years, remembering that the general of my original company, my graduating class at West Point, said that, and I've never forgotten it, and it sustained me, or someone who's shipwrecked. 42 days. Some line out of the Bible, they said they repeated over and over, and it kept them going. Why is it that when it seems to have an external source, does it seem to have power that is not available? Why is it that the person, he's a graduate of West Point, he's got an IQ above average. The person in the distressed boat for over a month, quite intelligent, Why is it that they seem to be able to pull up something that they heard when they were a child, that some leader said, it was written in some supposed holy book, their mother said it, when the words just, maybe the words he remembered from some line out of a religious text, God will take care of those who have faith and persevere. And the man says, for 42 days, believing I would die at any minute, over and over I said this, and it gave me hope to go on. There's nothing funny. It's not just to laugh at people like that. Them remembering the words created a biochemical change in them on a continuing basis, a sustaining basis that had a real effect. But why is it? Why couldn't a person say, hey, it seems like I believe in God. I mean, I don't know where it came from. I grew up around it. I seem to believe in God, and here I'm out in this ocean. I don't know whether anybody will ever see me. I don't see anyone now. I don't have any food, no prospects for food. But surely, if there is a God somewhere outside this system, or looking down on here, if I persevere, if I keep my spirits up and I have faith that, hey, you surely didn't do this to me, or you're aware of this, and if I don't get real mad, it'll work out. Why cannot ordinary people come up with such as that and tell themselves that? Or as an aside, I might ask you, what do illiterate people do? Well, we'd have to expand it. What do illiterate, deaf and dumb, blind people do? Push it much further, of course, and you got no molecular feedback loop, and so the question of what they do becomes moot. Go back to the sermon. Beyond those two possibilities, the second one, I assume you caught that I was pointing out, is an external standard of someone attempting to apply themselves to the Judaic religion, the Christian religion. And it does not matter of us sitting here in criticism and say that no one can live by the Ten Commandments or no one can live by Jesus' so-called golden rule. It has an effect on them biochemically, even though they may get drunk and beat up their wife several nights a week, periodically. They think to themselves, and they or their partner repeats inside of their own yellow circuit, I should try and love my fellow man as myself. I should try and treat other people as I'd like for them to treat me. Or you hear somebody say it in a movie, and just for a few seconds he has a tingle. It's a heart-wrenching scene, some prejudicial situation. And as literature and movies are wont to do, after 89 minutes in the final minute, some bigoted person, some hard-hearted person suddenly comes to their senses and says, my God, I have wasted my life. Everyone's my fellow man. God's in heaven, and life ain't too bad. Because we should all realize that the only way we can live is to treat our fellow man as we'd like to be treated. The music begins to swell and the credits roll, and for a few seconds the guy tingles. And he would say, if it were brought up, he would say, I'm in favor of this. Yes, it's true, I can't always do it, but I try and subscribe to that. That is the second possibility of people in response to the eternal question of how should I treat other people. It's an external standard. Now, the third possibility is that which is not natural, that which is not ordinarily available, and that is treating people on the basis of what you understand. Now, there are very few people on this planet can do that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but it's not going to sound, in my words, if you listen to it literally, it's not going to sound that exciting or that unusual. Some of you have been confronted with this before when you've written me questions asking something specifically about treating someone and you did not give back perhaps the specific response that you expected. Sometimes I do, and sometimes it's not what you wanted. But the question about how should I treat other people? I don't have this in any sort of order, as you might expect. I have no mental outline. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that cover as many of the subjects that you people bring up. Treating ordinary people in life. Now, this is all predicated on the basis that we'll assume that you've got some understanding that sometimes there is an more than momentary awareness of the fact that things are wired up in such a way that there is almost no slack in life, just enough that the machine does not freeze up, but that people are doing that which they have to do, that there is another force in operation, that life itself is alive. We are part of its body. It has, in a sense, in a quite real sense, all we see from this level ordinarily are just reflections of it, but it has its own built-in contradictions. It has its own partner. It simultaneously, through man himself, over here says yea, and over here says nay. And it is no more than a reflection of what goes on in humanity. But on the basis of treating other people, assuming you've got some understanding, that's what I was going to start talking about. You cannot treat other people as though they've got no freedom. You cannot treat them as though they're incapable of understanding anything. Now, this is not possible for it to happen mechanically for anyone who understands anything. But that is not the way to ever treat anyone. And I know that some of you, I could say all of you eventually, you or your partner one will come up with this, of believing that you're beginning to understand a little bit, or you're beginning to think that you can stretch some, at least in theory, something you thought you'd heard me say, into the kind of area that you believe that if you were fired up enough, if you had other circuits going, if you could expand yourself outdoors, if you could stay away from just the dichotomy of ordinary thought and feeling, that you in fact would be a kind of, at least bush league magician. That if people fucked with me, I could really play games on them. I could just run them in circles emotionally. I could take their minds and just twist them. All right, theoretically, that's true. But if you had any understanding, I'll choose the best word as far as words go, you can't do that. And it's not as crude as some great cosmic law, although I'm not saying that's not the basis of it. You can't do it. If you'd like it in a real mystical way, you don't ever think about it. You could do it, but you forget about it. And if somebody said, hey, the way that person was acting, kind of thing you said, couldn't you have just done so-and-so? And probably the person would have just gone the opposite direction. I'm just proposing a possible scenario. I happen to think about it, and so I'll go ahead and say it. And you might say, yeah, that's true, I could have. Then at least the unspoken question is, well, why didn't you do it? And the unspoken answer would be, I don't know, I didn't think about it. It's not literally correct, but it's close enough. All of this that I'm talking about right now, my first example, is predicated on the assumption that you want something out of the person. Now, I'm not about to get into some pseudo-moralistic scenario and say we're not supposed to want anything out of our fellow man, and we should be a living incarnation of Buddha's verbal example of being a man with no great taste, of no passion, man with no connections to life. We're back to our friend the dead people. Part of you being here, the initial purpose, regardless of whatever you may serve later on through this, your initial minimal purpose is to transform energy. At the minimal level, we're here on the same basis as ducks, frogs, butterflies, coyotes, elephants, rhinos, trees, is to transform energy, is to move it in life's body. So these kind of apparent religious ideas or philosophical ideas or mystical ideas that in some way we should not have any plans for our fellow man. You cannot be greedy and think, well, my fellow man has material possessions I want. He has a position in life, a reputation that I envy. that, "Whoa, my friends, that's the beginning of a downfall." It's true enough, but you are here, the ordinary people, who would say that it is my firm belief that we should not desire anything from our fellow man. There's some sort of curse, that if we could free ourselves from any form of envy, just any form of desire that our fellow man should behave in the way in which we think he should, or he should behave in a way that would be profitable or pleasing to us. Those who say that do not understand it. It is a shadow cast by another reality. But in a sense, what I was leading up to, in the same sentence, is abandon any kind of moralistic tinge to this. But in a sense, there's always an exchange going on. That in a sense, you're always wanting something from anybody you're connected with. At the minimal level, you're supposed to. That there's going to be a kind of, at the bare minimum, heat exchange go on, if any kind of exchange goes on. Of you just standing in a corner and a stranger walks up and he says, "Do you have the time?" And if you want me to get a little more in detail, just listen quick, it's not that important. Unless you just do it almost as a totally mechanical reaction. That is, that you and your partner are somewhere else. That you're now plotting that you're already 5 minutes late and you've got an appointment with a would-be business associate, and you're almost oblivious to what color the light is. You're almost about to step in traffic. You all know what I mean. And some guy says, "Hey, do you have the time?" Now, other than if you just went, "Yeah." And it's almost like the man didn't exist. I'm just trying to show you, you can get down to a real minimal exchange, which that would about be it. But to be, in the ordinary sense, conscious at all, and to turn to the guy and say, "Oh, yes, here," or it's 2:30, well, it's 2:31, actually, 2:31. There has been an exchange. You walk off, you never see him again. If I suddenly jumped out from behind a building and says, "The guy you just gave the time to, describe him to me. What color was his hair? How old was he? Gee, I didn't notice." And you could say, "I almost had no experience with a man, but something happened." But now to the idea that has always been around, that in some way we should, in a spiritual sense, some way be cutting off these kind of desires for some kind of payoff in a relationship. It cannot be done. Well, what the reflection is in religion, what the reflection is in would-be mystical systems, is to get it when it gets beyond the minimal level that you have got to always cope with. I'll get to that in a minute, but you're always having to cope with that. But to get beyond that is you get into the unique area of the wiring of man, that which seems to be the personality relationships. I guess ordinary people would call it the psychological relationships. It is primarily that which the yellow circuit can put into words, and it can describe an exchange, and the exchange needs to come out the yellow circuit. And it's really based upon, don't forget, the higher areas of the blue circuit. There's got to be the passion behind it, the basis of it. But the yellow circuit interprets it without any choice as to our interchange. Our business transaction has got to come out. You don't even think about it. It doesn't even say it's got to. The assumption, if there's going to be an exchange, there's going to be a bartering confrontation, I am going to get the best of it. I will be pleased, I will be happy, I will be better off, with no particular thought necessarily to the other person. And if it does not apparently work that way, or if apparently it's not going to work in that manner, that is when consciousness has an objection. That's when it apparently would begin to plot. It would get into areas such as fraud, theft. To use overt examples, to use non-physical examples, it gets into what the religions have always referred to in various ways, such as greed and envy and etc. Is the wiring of one person, believing that any exchange should make me the winner. At the minimal level, the person asking you the time and you give it to him. I assume I picked a fairly innocuous one. Do you see that in a sense, I assume you will back me up on this, you could say that neither party had a particular gain from it. Now the person will assuming wanted to know the time and he got that from you, but what was the cost to you? If you weren't all tied up in your imagination about what you were about to do, I could point out that you got some gain from it because you're suddenly standing there waiting on the light and a person taps you and says, pardon me, they smiled, you have the time. You say, yes, it's 6:21. The person says, thank you, I appreciate that, and he smiles. And you got something. If you were aware of it, there was a real biochemical exchange there that the person smiled and said, hey, I appreciate it. Have a nice day. Assuming that term does not now choke you people. But something happened, he paid you back. At that level, you waste your time worrying about how to treat people. You waste your time involved with any sort of theoretical question or some sort of philosophical investigation as to who got the best of it. Should I not be wasting my energies in life dealing with people, giving them the time? I'm busy. What's it to me? Won't the man buy a watch? I had to buy a watch. And the question of how should I treat people, if you will try and keep in mind, regardless of my intro, I was not going to preach a real sermon on this, but if you tried to keep a constant awareness of the fact that any time I'm dealing with anybody, if I have to deal with somebody enough to give them a fair amount of my attention, not even me and the partner, but just me, that I've got to go into a store and I've got to ask for something specific. I've got to say, I need something to spot a carpet, but I want to go somewhere that knows something about it because I've got a particular kind of spot, so I'm going to have to go in there, and I'm not just going up to the shelf and pick up any of them. I'll go ask somebody, and they say, yeah, there's a whole counter, and I said, no. What I need is I have dropped, I don't know, it was either on the carpet, it's either Oyster's Rockefeller or Silly Putty on the carpet. And I need something specifically for that. In other words, I'm going in, and I've got to some degree, give real attention to another person. So there's going to be an exchange of heat. There's going to be an exchange of energy between me and another person. All the way from that to whoever you live with, whoever you deal with here, your family. You are an absolute, from our viewpoint now, you're an absolute idiot to believe that you can be a hermit, which, as I pointed out to you in the past, that's part of what the hermit syndrome is. It's part of, in another sense, I was pointing out, tried to last week about Zen and some other verbal descriptions of would-be mystical approaches and experiences, is to try and to cut down almost all biochemical alterations of the person. And a kind of assumption, which I must tell you again is not ill-founded in reality, but on the assumption that if I could cut out all of these things that affect my biochemistry, in some way I would open up. I'd blossom. I'd be a blank page. The gods could write anything they wanted to on me. They could, just write this mystical graffiti on my consciousness and my little soul. But what they're trying to do is to stop all biochemical functions. I'll just reach a state of some kind of mortal perfection, and there I'll be. And the slings and the arrows of outrageous fortune and ill will and the IRS cannot prevail against me. Hermits, try it in a cruder sense, hermits normally are, it's like their front door is down in the red or the higher areas of the red circuit. That, fuck all that shit, I'll just move, I'll take myself up on a mountain. I'll worry about my soul if I ever have time or if I'm so inclined. I'll worry about some kind of expansion of consciousness later. My problem is, these people drive me nuts physically. Just being around these people, I'm just going to get away from them. And some people are wired up to do it. But it is not going to bring some form of spiritual salvation. But if you could keep a continuing awareness that anytime the person you're living with, probably the best example, or your family, you are continually, you got no choice, unless you're about to absolutely rupture the relationship. You got no choice. You are continually exchanging energy. I might point this out. It seems to be changing somewhat, and it's not a matter of right or wrong, of course. But some of you men, I've given some hints before. This has been a hardwired fact, and it's still extant, that a kind of exchange between the sexes, between the men and women, seems to be somewhat unbalanced. That is, women's continual complaint, if they were to vocalize it, and any of you men who's got any eyesight are aware of it by now, is that men do not give them enough attention. I mean, sure, when sex is involved, they're just coming in the house and to say hello, how are you, and to kiss them. Now, we'll assume that most of you will put up with it, or if, you know, the woman you're living with sort of reminds you, or she puts her arm out first, you might go, and you say, what's for dinner? It's that old joke. And as far as men in general have been concerned, that seems to be a sufficient exchange of energy on that level. You know, sex seems to be another problem. Then a man miraculously seems to give his attention a little more forthrightly and directly to a woman. But on what seems to be a more, I guess to a man, a more casual level, men do not seem to need the same degree of exchange of energy on a non-sexual level, just an affectionate level. But everybody, this is not just men, but if everybody could keep a kind of continuing awareness that whoever I'm dealing with, and especially those that in some way are close to me, blood kin, sexual friends, if I see them just for a few moments, there is an exchange going on. There's always an exchange going on as why you're attracted to the person sexually, or that's why you and the person are friends, same sex, different sex. Blood kin, you got no choice. There's an attraction there, even though you may say that you hate your family. If you do that, if you still say that, you are an idiot, because there is an attraction. There is a biochemical attraction to your family that you can't help. You got no choice. It may come out in the way in which you're wired up as saying, I hate them. Hate them. Don't ever want to see them. Try not to even think about them. That's right. They don't have any effect on you. If what I was going to try and give you is a kind of minimal walking around rule, if everybody could keep just an awareness, not just because I say so, of course, but then start looking into it. But anybody that you're friendly with, I'm picking out just the obvious ones, those that you cannot escape, those that should give you the easiest way in which to get some insight in this: friends, family, sexual partners. If you're just around them a few minutes, don't you see, if it's just going to be a few seconds, well, I'm going to stop by and see Fred because I'm going to try to rebuild the carburetor on my car, and there's one part I can't remember that I used to do. And I know he does a lot of work on his car, and I'll just pop by his house just for a second, and I'll ask him, hey, when I do so-and-so, what should I do? All right, apparently you're going by to get some direct information. As far as you're concerned, Fred's going to know something about work on your automobile that you don't know, and he'll be glad to tell you because he's your friend. But you and Fred are friends to begin with because of a biochemical attraction that to some degree both of you get a payoff. Both of you get an exchange of energies by being friends. So even if you just go by, and it's going, you literally going to be there 90 seconds. Pull up in his yard, and there he is, and you say, hey, Fred, what is it I should get when I'm going to rebuild the carburetor? Should I do so-and-so? And Fred says, no, I'll buy such and such, and if I can get down here. You say, hey, catch you later, thanks, and you drive off. There was an exchange of energy. Not just the information, that was one exchange, certainly. But there was an exchange. Your friendship between you and Fred was built upon an already recognized exchange of energies that you two get together. It seems to vary from time to time if you watched it, but overall, both of you seem to gain that being around Fred by and large has what seems to be to you a favorable, a pleasurable biochemical alteration in you. You can hear his name. You can be at a party and somebody says, hey, aren't you a friend of Fred so-and-so? And they smile and you go, yeah, do you know Fred? And you smile, which is a reflection of a biochemical change. Surely you know that. I'm talking about a real smile. They say, Fred. You go, Fred, you know Fred. And there was an alteration. Did just somebody mention Fred? You thought of Fred? And you went, oh. If you could keep some kind of continuing awareness that anybody that you're friends with, sexually or otherwise, and your family, and you can take it further, that's not the end of it. Your job, you can say, I hate my job. Then the question is, why did you end up in that job? But you take it further. I'm giving you what should be some easy ones to start off with. If you could hold a continuing awareness that there is, I may not understand it right now, and I've never thought about it before, but there is a two-way energy exchange that both of us find pleasurable, profitable, useful, pleasing. Pick any word you like, it's unimportant. Both of you seem to benefit by being friends, sexual or otherwise. And as I said, you take it from there and it goes everywhere else. It just gets harder to see. If you could do that, can you perceive at all how that might, to say the least, affect these kind of questions as how should I treat people? How about people you know? However you ended up knowing them, an in-law, perhaps somebody where you work, that contrary to friendship seems to be somebody that you have an absolute native, and it seems to be a two-way street, dislike, that you and this other person, the first time you met, can't explain it. You might have later, or you or your partner may have tried to, but the truth is you cannot explain it any more than you can explain why you're sexually attracted to somebody, or why you and Fred are friends. When Fred's a notorious drunk, he doesn't bathe half the time. Yeah, but you don't know Fred like I do. It's inexplicable at the ordinary level. It is likewise inexplicable, although people will try to. Same kind of talking analysis at line level consciousness as to why they dislike someone. It is real, though, and it happens just like that. You can be wired up in such a way, you and somebody else. That kind of antagonism, whether words are ever said on that level, it's not required that you and the other person ever get in a fist fight, but you and that person both know we don't like each other. Every time I have to do business with them, every time I have to go in this part of the factory and I have to see him, we may nod. I don't ever stick out my tongue. He's never tried to trip me. I don't like to go there. I'm aware of it, and I'm sure he's aware of it. That is an energy exchange. And something very real caused it. Not you, not because that person reminds you of your old dumb uncle that used to beat you up. It's none of that. It is nothing that ordinary consciousness can describe, because if ordinary consciousness could be unordinary, which it can't, and which is why you're all here, but if it could, ordinary consciousness would understand there is no explaining this, and yet it's real. And all of my explanations, everything I've ever told you, is be like your partner finally coming to real confession. Everything I ever told you about why you dislike him, why you dislike people in general, why you're afraid of women, why you're afraid of men, everything I ever told you was a lie. It was a goddamn lie, I'm going to admit it. That's if ordinary consciousness could be extraordinary, which it can't. Which is why you're sitting here listening to this. But if you could hold a continuing awareness that anybody that I seem to be involved with, whether it's friend, whether it's foe, whether it seems to be of my willful doing, or whether it seems to be some kind of accidental maelstrom that I've been sucked into, something was afoot, biochemically. Something within the body of life brought me to this place, brought that person there. And it's not a matter at ordinary level of taking it personally. And as you should know by now, at ordinary level, it is not a matter of coming up with an ordinary yellow circuit analyzation. Well, based upon my interpretations of Jung and Freud and some of the existentialist writers, I would say, and you should know by now it tells you nothing, but if you could hold a continuing awareness until you feel it, which you will. If you don't experience any of this, of course, it's a waste of time. You can feel that whatever's going on is a continuing exchange of energy. It is a continuing thing between me, individuals apparently, me and apparently not me in general, me and the body of life. It is a continuing shifting, abruptly, subtly, orally, visually, tactily. It is a continuing alteration in me that I used to call my own self, my I, my consciousness. It is a continuing shifting of biochemical energy, messed up with the lubrication of enzymes, but it's still being shifted, and that's what it is. And as far as me treating people some particular way, what we're talking about is an exchange of biochemical prescriptions, biochemical recipes. And at the minimal level, there is no real control, nor should there be. But when you get above that minimal level and you start inquiring, as everyone does, as how should I treat people? When you get above that level, when you're aware of it, I don't mean rise above it, but when you're aware of that, where you can look further, when you've got a continuing awareness of whatever I do, if I go in and say, listen, I want a spot remover, no, wait, don't send me to the shelf yet. Let me tell you, as far as I'm concerned, I have a unique spot, and please save me some time. You're an expert. Tell me which one, let me tell you what it is. When I go in there, there's an exchange of energy, not just money for a product or a service. There's an exchange of energy is going to go on. Once you've got a continuing awareness of that this is not a problem, it is not a matter of me going out in life and I am being beset upon by Philistines. I get in situations that seem to drain me of energy. I have the impression that people are continually, if not taking advantage of me, wanting to take advantage of me. I seem to wear myself out trying to protect myself psychically. That people are always after me. People are trying to, as the hillbilly singers used to say, the men, women trying to suck away my soul, steal my spirit. If you can get above that, once you understand that there is an inescapable minimal exchange of energy that you're here for. Now, humanity is here for much more, or we would not have the yellow circuit. And a few people are here for even more than the rest of humanity. That's why this thing exists in whatever form. But beyond that is then when you begin to see for yourself that beyond the minimal level, I now begin to see the unique exchange, which is not going to sound astounding when I describe it, except you can't remember it. You're not wired up to remember it. No one is. It's not natural. But I see, I've got a continuing awareness that there is a minimal exchange going on continually. From a guy asking what time it is, and I tell him, and he smiles, thanks me, and I say, hey, no problem. All the way from that to, hello, darling, how are you? To, oh, my little girl is sick. Somebody help, my child. Or my mother is dying. Beyond that minimal level, then you begin to see that which is unique in man is the areas that everyone else refers to, by and large, as the problems of humanity. That it is the unique things in man. Personal hatred, prejudice, bad attitudes, inconsiderate attitudes, hostile attitudes. That these are the things that are the problems. These are not problems to chimpanzees and hippos. These are problems unique to man. So now you've got an area that from one viewpoint, I'm separating it artificially, of course, and this is no useful information for humanity in general. But once you've got a feel, your own feel, that there is a minimal level that's not a problem, it's not a contest between me and other individuals or me and humanity in general. It is not a death-defying struggle going on. As long as I'm alive, as long as I'm not a hermit, if you're a hermit, you'd still have your own problems, but as long as I'm not a hermit, if I'm ever going to deal with another person, even one other person in this life from now on, there is an inescapable exchange of energies going on. It cannot be helped. There's nothing to struggle against. There's nothing to argue about. It's going on. If I see them, if I was the last person on earth, I thought, after the Holocaust, and one day I look, and there comes another person, as soon as you see them, there's an exchange going on. As soon as they see you, the exchange shifts a little, assuming that you saw them before they saw you. And from their viewpoint, vice versa. But once you have an understanding that I am not really attempting to put into any poetic terminology tonight, but I have described it sufficiently for those of you who are listening, that you get an understanding, a feel on your own that there is an inescapable, minimal exchange of energy going on between you and everybody, and it's not a problem. It is not something to be avoided. It is not something to be manipulated. It is not something to be argued about. It is not something to suffer over. If you give anybody a minimal degree of attention to go by them on the street and nod and say, hey, there was an exchange of energy. Can't be helped. There's an exchange of energy going on even when you're not giving your attention. But once you've got a continuing awareness of that, a feel of it, not just, you have to start off somewhere, so you start off trying to remember what I said and to look into it. But once you've got a feel for it, then the areas that seem to be unique to man, that are always lumped as being the problems, that life would be paradise. This would be heaven on earth, if only. And then they get into the matters of how people treat each other. That they do not treat each other properly based upon what? With ordinary people. Based upon some external standard. Or in a few cases, it seems to be the other person's particular opinion. That is, some individual's opinion. The very things that seem to be unique to man, the very things that seem to be the, quote, problems, insofar as how people treat one another, is then the area that you people, whether you know or not, really ask the question, how should I treat other people? It is not a matter, simply, in life, of embracing, specifically, all of the myriad moves that life makes. Because as you should be able to see on a clear day by now, if not forever, you should be able to see, quite simply, what I pointed out. When you can at least pull your consciousness and awareness laterally at all, that life is operating in contradictory manners at this very second. That it is having men dump so-called pollutants in rivers, and 1 mile across that river is a group of people life is sent out there with signs complaining about these other people dumping it. And life did both of them. Once you've got some understanding of that, once you've got a feel of that, then it's not a matter of actively embracing, in the full sense of that word, all the way from the red to the top of the ordinary yellow circuit. It is not a question of actively embracing all of life's various and contradictory moves. And neither is it a matter of you offering some kind of blanket resistance. It becomes a matter of whether you can become a knowledgeable, judicious associate to life. Or to go back to one of my older allegorical pictures, being here, as we all are in this river, It's not a matter that you have to go out and swim with any particular crowd. That your consciousness says, what a boisterous bunch of crude folk. Always playing horsey and pushing each other around. Or look over there, all these prigs looking snooty and down their noses at us in last year's bathing suit. You do not have to go and swim with any particular crowd, nor should you. It is not required that you get out and play in the debris. But it is a matter of this. If you're going to pursue this, you cannot allow any form of your talking circuits to theoretically resist the general flow of the river. As long as you are, you're back in the hands of the Philistines. You're back in the hands of your own partner. You're back in the hands of line-level consciousness. You're back to being a critic of a river. You're back to being a critic of those who are playing in the river, and they were born there. They've got no other possible place to live. And if you had any extraordinary eyesight, you'd realize, hey, I don't either. You would realize the debris that seems to float by, that catches everyone. It's not a mortal flaw. The debris attracts everyone on the basis of my. Who in the world threw that in the river? Who did such a thing? Where do you throw your garbage? And I'm not just talking about, of course, red circuit garbage. Here comes a huge sentence of a prejudicial statement goes by, and you go, get away from me. I don't want this on me. Here comes the blood of some victim. Here comes the knife of the attacker of the victim. Here comes a whole segment of history of some inhumane era, as far as you're concerned, and you get away. But no one ever asks, where does your refuge go? Everything you've ever done, where did it go? Well, I don't see it. Far be it from me to be crude, but I could carry this allegory further, since everybody's born in the river, and everybody must, how can I put it delicate, go to the bathroom in the river. But people only notice other people's shit. That's the debris. But everyone is wired up that you feel this flow go on, and it seems to be filled with crowds of idiots. The crude, the disillusioned, the hurt. What are they doing here? The injured, people crying in the river, getting it all salty, people bleeding in the river. Then the debris itself, the leftovers from these people. The general flow is not open to criticism for the few people. If you do not ever see that, then you're not assisting life. You are not a knowledgeable associate. And you cannot be judicious in the way you treat people. Over the last few months, as I assume you've noticed, I have referred back many times and many ways on the basis of criticism and how it must be avoided. Unless you begin to understand that yourself, it does sound like a sermon. I assume that I am refraining from making it sound that way, but you could write it down, some of the things I've said. You can compare it with any religion, almost any would-be mystical system, almost any, even minor league guru. It's always somewhere. Life has always been talking through man about, listen, you'd be better off, or you'd be more religious, or you'd be more in my favor if you would not be so critical of your fellow man, if you would not be so hasty to judge him. And it's a fact. Except on the mechanical level, you see, it's not open to real criticism, but as you see, it has not had the immediate lineal effect that this cause would seem to produce if everyone would follow some external rule. Christianity, Judaism, humanistic theory, philosophy, that we should all be less critical of our fellow man. Life keeps saying that through man, But for reasons, and I've already hinted, and some of you should see, I think I'll bring it up again in a minute, life has never reached what seems to be a satisfactory solution of this equation. But if you had a continuing feel, your own awareness, that there is an inescapable minimal exchange of energy going on, and then get above that, and then that which seems to be unique, that which seems to be personally specific to you, that I could treat my fellow man better, especially some of the people I could name specifically. I mean, there's some I could name, if they only would not treat me in such and such manner. I mean, so many people in life treat me in sort of a cavalier manner, and they don't know how sensitive I am. I know I may appear to be rough on the outside, but I'm very sensitive, and especially women. Women have never realized the poet in my soul, or whatever your story is. When you get to that level, then what you can feel at the minimal level begins to take on a real clarity that will assume the other people we're speaking about are not involved with this. It doesn't matter, we'll just assume they are. Their relationship with you, sexual or otherwise, was based upon a biochemical, needed exchange of energies that life had that brought you two together. What they're getting out of it, they've got no control over, much less any understanding of. Any question as to why do people treat me in such an unthinking manner is just an admission of your idiocy. It's an admission that, well, I might as well face up to it. I don't understand crap about anything. To ask, how could somebody, especially someone who knows me, how could they treat me this way? You're questioning life breathing. You're questioning the fact that life's blood must circulate. Well, if we were back in your forefathers' time, you would be questioning, God forbid, you'd be questioning the actions of God. But what you're doing is you're questioning the continued health of life. Without knowing it, if any individual, if any of the particular cells in life's body, to make a crude analogy, could say, wait a minute, I don't like the way I'm being treated, and you could suddenly do something about it, you'd give life a rash right there, a pimple, a sore place, a cell would die. Blood, energy would not properly circulate there. You would have become a hermit cell. You would have indeed become a cell amidst Satari. You would have a cell that was no longer being fed. That I'm now in a state and nothing can touch me. To begin to see anything, you must see that life does not approve of that, because life only allows that to happen under very specific circumstances to a chosen few. That is, people who die. So until you join that blessed throne, you're going to continue to be a part of a minimal and inescapable level of energy exchange, and then up to a level that you can have some control over. Once you begin to see it, you have no choice. You must have some control over it. But I'm about to leave this for the time being to remind you again, it's not a matter of embracing. We're talking about above the minimal level, of in some way embracing everyone playing in the river, of attempting to either overtly or silently to lend your agreement to every possible move that life makes. Nor is it a question or a matter of giving just blanket resistance. That no, this whole area here, this whole philosophy, this whole movement, no. Life has got to put its foot down. Some of us right-thinking people have got to take action. It is a matter of whether you become aware that life has its own partner, that life does move in a myriad number of ways, and at ordinary level, no one is in any position to say, or you're not in any position to say, to decide, to accept, to believe, to wait. Now things should go from here to there. Or this one area right here, this move life's making, it's got to snap out of that. There's no doubt. It's got to come to its senses. Of course, ordinary people would say, these people have got to come to their senses or be done away with. The people who think like this have got to be either straightened out, or we must let them join the blessed few, the chosen ones. As we'll plant them like fruitcakes. To get beyond that point, to see it for yourself, is your questions about how should I treat people, you'd be surprised how much of a non-problem that is. But notice, would not it be better for me or somebody that you would accept it from to say, look, I made a list here. We're going to post it. I'm going to make copies. Here's the way I've listed about 20 of the most common situations between people. Here's the way you should treat people. Here's what you should say to them. If somebody, well, here it is. All right, if somebody treats you in an insensitive manner emotionally, here's what your response should be. Or if someone accuses you of something unjustly, you know, they're mistaken or they did on purpose, whatever. Well, maybe there should be two categories. They do it accidentally. Here's what you should do. Here's the way you should treat them. You know, don't be too quick to laugh. That is your forefathers' religion. I keep saying your forefathers, all of your people, you've got some religion in your genes. You've got it down the DNA from somewhere. You know, you people who grew up Jewish, you can't suddenly throw it away. You people who grew up Baptist or Catholic, you can't simply abandon it. It becomes of no importance. You've got to be able to rise above it. But it is all in there. All of you, if you grew up with agnostics, at least in this part of the world, and all of you, at least from your parents somewhere and your grandparents, you got some kind of genes that are close to the so-called, I guess, humanistic philosophy. It is simply within everyone to feel as though there has got to be a stated, understandable way to treat my fellow man. Whether I can do it or not, I want somebody to tell me. And your parents apparently tried to tell you, their parents apparently tried to tell them, the church apparently tries to tell people, the churches say the gods told us, it was revealed through certain men, that these are the specific manners in which we should treat one another. It is not that simple, verbally, with a few people, but as I indicated, once you see it, it is even more simple than not being simple. Vis-a-vis, related to, apropos to, and then perhaps not, some of what I just said is, for the holidays, how about a few questions for you? How would it be possible for you to ever grow if you did not have a partner, if you did not have the partner? How? What would you do? I mean, the very thing, I've named it the partner for the time being, renamed it. Life has always named it. Life has always had men talking about it. Satan, evil spirits, demonic spirits, incorrect attitudes, uncontrollable, uncivilized, unconscious mind. Don't make me search for any more. Religion, proverbs, apparent everyday common sense is filled with it. Life has always been talking about it. Of late, I've been calling it the partner. And from that view, it is already built into everyone's own biochemistry, a feeling that there is something in me amiss. I am too smart, perhaps, but now I'm too civilized. I don't believe anymore that some God somewhere and then some fallen angel is fighting over my soul. No, I don't think so. And I'm not sure that it's my mother's fault that I'm so miserable. You know, she didn't help a lot, but surely, I mean, I look around at other people that I thought I grew up with, and their mother, I thought, boy, if I had her for a mother, that'd be wonderful. And hell, they're more fucked up than I am. Yeah. So I don't know. So my explanation ain't bad. Everybody is born into a partnership. and they got this partner. At any rate, we've been through this before. There seems to be that in everybody that is a thorn, that is a problem, that I would surely be Mr. or Ms. Perfection. I would be walking around beauty and bliss were it not for, comma, or were it not for, colon, and then the string of things that are wrong. It's never me. I mean, it's not me. I didn't willfully do this. It's something. The poor old partner. How would you grow? How could you change were it not for the partner, if you did not have a partner? Now the better question. How could life grow if it did not have a partner? Should we vote to leave it there? How about back to the biochemistry? Some weeks ago, you remember I was talking about posing? Did anyone take it as far, or have any of you attempted to put any of it together since then, about posture? I'm just going to pick one area tonight. Posture, everything from was commonly referred to as posture, to more specific forms, not just the total body, the posture such as the Burt Lancaster facial posture. Or Richard Nixon. Have any of you had occasion yet to try and put any of it together or to get your own observation that there is a continuing attempt on the organism to alter, as I was pointing out, its biochemistry makeup, to try and reach some point that seems to be a medial point to it at that moment. And last week, I told you I was going to refrain then from calling it pleasurable, but let's go off on a little side street for a second. That under most ordinary conditions, most people, that is, most organisms in this body of life, through posture of all kinds, all the way from my exaggerated posings to the facial, are attempting a kind of pleasurable alteration of their own biochemistry. Even those that are apparently wired up to most of the time look like. Or those that you tell a joke and everybody laughs and the person goes, or almost any conversation that comes up about the potential outcome of the Super Bowl this year, or how the congressional race looks in your district next year, and most any comments made, the person's facial attitude is always one of, don't pick your words, cynicism, mild disgust. I was not trying to lead you to any psychological way station on this little path. It is simply back to that which consciousness is not wired up to ever see, and then when it sees it, it's simply not wired up to remember it. That your organism is already programmed all the way from the posture, you know, how you stand, that you may appear to stand rather aloof, or you may the kind that seems to be that you're just waiting to be kicked, to your face, you know, whether it seems to always kind of be quizzical, or it seems to be kind of an already spoken message of, hey, don't fuck with me, or that seems to be that all of that forget anything about psychological. Forget, well, I always look like this because, I don't know, my father for years tricked me. He used to make me get up on the top of the icebox and he'd say, jump off, I want to teach you, I want to teach you the meaning of love and trust. And he'd make me do it every Sunday, and he'd always step back and I'd fall. So sure, yeah, I guess I look kind of, you know, you could say that, but hey, I got a reason to. The simple matter, albeit not quite so simple, of course, that I'm trying to get to, do any of you know by now, just that which you're wired up to do, take it on you or look at somebody next to you. What they're doing, that organism, this is not some kind of psychological game, why you look like this, or why your most common response to things that are said from other people, the exchange of energies, that your most common response is to smile, or your most common response is to go, or your most common response is to try and look absolutely blank. That is not something, quote, psychological. Your organism is feeding itself a prescription. It is affecting your biochemistry. I've never pointed it out, but how many of you, I know how many, but some of you don't know about each other, but how many of you do you think have ever written me a note or ever made any comment off the several tasks I've given over the last few years that involved, such as the one that you were supposed to do from waking up to going to bed at night? Remember that one? And whatever it was, 12 hours from the time you woke up to the time you went to bed, all day was to, all day, by yourself, driving in the car, no matter what you did. You remember that one? And there were variations along the way. But I would suggest that most of you would be surprised how many of you directly and then subtly found that just astounding and written me notes all the way from one word thing like task dash whew, referring to that one. To people who have written little notes, and I've never responded talking to you people, people wanting to say, why was that so enjoyable? And then one person I recall wrote me and said, why was the task of smiling all day so enjoyable? And then they put parentheses, and then point out something like, well, isn't that silly? Why should I not find it enjoyable to smile all day? I don't normally do it. In the parentheses, new paragraph, but still, why do I find it so enjoyable? That little act, as subtle as it may have been, whatever you're doing, do any of you get a flash of it by now? Forget whether you're willfully involved with it, forget whether at that time you have any apparent awareness, but do any of you begin to catch continuing glimpses that whatever it is you're doing? And you can say, well, I've got a habit. Once you point out that, yeah, a lot of times during the day, I'll be thinking to myself, maybe we're just sitting around, or people will be talking to me. Then that you point out, I know, I do it, I don't know, maybe I need glasses. Well, no, I don't need glasses, I've checked. I don't know, I guess it's some kind of habit, but you're right. People will be talking to me, or I'll be listening. It's not, I'm not trying, I don't know what it is, but you're right. Now that you do it to me, I see, I do that. And then treat it as though, well, all right, it's a meaningless hobby. And from one viewpoint it is. I mean, habit. But do any of you get any kind of glimpses that your own organism has found its prescription in one way, that this creates a pleasurable, although by now, of course, if it is this kind of habit that I was insinuating, that people are not even aware of that you're doing this, this is not just simply rubbing your face. It is not something you could try and describe it. A psychologically inclined ordinary person could say, all right, the person doing that, they're kind of covering their face, and I bet you'd find out they're the kind of people, when somebody's presenting ideas or trying to have a discussion, they kind of do that, and it's a symbolic thing of, hey, don't try to influence my mind, or don't look in my eyes, don't try to... Do any of you have any awareness that you are changing your biochemistry in doing this? How about if you just always pause when someone's talking to you and it comes time for you to speak or respond? And you always do something, you just pause. Maybe you don't have any specific physical habit, but you pause. Then you say, well, and then you respond. Everything that you are wired up to do, everything that every human does, is feeding that own organism back something that pleasurably, profitably, as far as it's concerned, affects its biochemistry right then. Fuck anything about, all right, that's a symbolic hiding of one's face. There are people who talk and they're constantly putting their hand over their mouth. That's people that are unsure of themselves. That's people, chances are you'd find that their parents, anytime they'd be sitting around the table and the child ever said anything, one of the parents or both would say, ah, shut up, you don't know anything. And so the child grew up unsure of itself in the verbal skills. And so anytime it speaks, I mean, just go, the man is now 40 and he'll say, well, my opinion is of, and he does this. Remember, it is not that the scenario of their parents said, hey, shut up. It's not that that's not true. It's not that that did not happen. But that's not what's going on. Remember, given the choices between physiologically and psychologically speaking, there is no psychologically speaking. The man is literally, or the woman is literally, right then, affecting their own biochemistry, primarily up here. And of course, you can do that in public, whereas you can't masturbate in public. Well, I don't guess, well. Now, I waited a long time to ever start going into this because it is so simplistic that I thought perhaps life itself would lead me to find a parable to create a whole new fourth or fifth dimension map that didn't seem to be this and drag everybody into it. But hell, none of us are going to live forever, and I'm older than most of you. And so I have finally just come out as simplistically as I can from week to week. Everything is going on. The obvious ones people seem to know, but you're not aware of that. We're about to break up this meeting and say, well, that's the end of it for tonight. You'll take off your coat, perhaps. You'll stretch from having sit here. You'll look over to see what kind of food's back on the table. You'll catch a visual glimpse of something. Ooh, is that stewed rutabagas? And it will have some kind of biochemical effect just seeing it. Or somebody will go past. You'll think you heard somebody mention something about rutabagas tonight. Sound waves went into your ear, rutabagas. And something happened. Forget Pavlov's dog. You may either saliva or else you may spit, you know, like on rutabagas. Or somebody says, hey, do you know that Fred's here from out of town? The sound waves, Fred, got into your senses and created a biochemical alteration of like, really? Or perhaps in your case, you're kidding. Perhaps as we eat tonight, maybe we'll turn on, pick up the jazz station here, the classical station, and listen to music. Why? Not everybody enjoys music the same as other people. Well, it's about music. Libraries are full of people who've tried to analyze the spiritual aspects, the emotional aspects of music. The simple one nobody ever looks at. If you like music, say a specific kind. Let's get that far. That specific kind creates what in you is a pleasurable biochemical alteration through sound waves. That's it. Well, I don't know. I have tried to analyze my feelings about Wagner. And it seems, it seems somehow to represent this kind of Paladinian struggle of the mythical character against the overwhelming odds of the, etc. People can make a living writing that. Life needs it in some way. Those are not idiots that say such things as that. Life needs that. Life needed to say it, and it made some poor guy say that. Maybe it made him write a book. Worse yet, made some poor other people have to read the damn thing. But far be it from me to criticize. No, it's none of my business. It's none of my business. But the simplistic reality of it is never seen. And it is so demonstrably true nowadays that I could tell someone, a music critic, someone who had written this great tome of the critical analysis of Wagner, and I point out, hey, music, the main thing about music is, whoever listens to it, you like Wagner, right? Yes, I do. All right, the sound waves that come in creates, the only thing you can get, I could, in 2 or 3 minutes, get him to agree, all right, if it were not for the senses, I wouldn't even be human. I wouldn't know anything. I wouldn't know Wagner from anything. I wouldn't know what music was. All right. The sounds that come out of that speaker, out of that orchestra, if you're there live, those sound waves are put together in such a way, be it voice and instrument, be it simply instrument, it doesn't matter. Those sound waves get into you personally, and it makes a molecular activity that was not happening prior to that, and the activity you find pleasurable, and you say, I love that. That, my friend, are it. That's the basis of it. Nowadays, I can get almost anybody to say, well, yeah, that's true, but, ha. And then there they'd go. I said I had tried to approach this once I decided to get into it in this way, and the few remaining years I have left. I didn't know the end was so near, but the simplicity of it, like I said, I could take almost anybody. I mean, to show you how far I could even get so low, as I point out, is to take a Wagner critic. And I think I could even get them to hear that one thing for a split second. And they'd say, well, yeah, comma, or yeah, but, comma, and it's not their fault. It's not your fault. You're not wired up to see that. It's just barely beginning to happen. I can just barely describe it. I can just barely hold your attention over pointing out, look, everything that happens to you comes in through the senses, and you don't know anything. You don't know that God is love. You don't know honor thy father and mother. You don't know put on your galoshes when it's raining. You don't know anything until whatever's happened out here. Even if his God said, hey, you, I decided that you're going to be my man or my woman. Until it gets in here and alters the molecular activity in your brain, you wouldn't know it if God came up and kicked you in the ass. Or if he did holler, hey, you, yeah, you. You hear that and think, well, sure, that's obvious. Now that you pointed out, that's obvious. But, listen, I got real problems. I have real esoteric questions. I'm talking about questions, yeah, I know all that. You don't know all that, or you wouldn't have any questions.